Welcome to the Clinician's Corner, the go-to podcast for functional health practitioners who want to deepen their clinical skills and deliver exceptional client results. I'm your host, Margaret Floyd-Barry, Master Restorative Health Practitioner and Executive Director of the Institute of Restorative Health. Each week, I interview leading experts to bring you the latest research, case studies, and evidence-based strategies for reversing chronic disease with actionable insights you can implement immediately to elevate your practice and transform how you deliver health.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the Clinician's Corner. I am Sarah Fields, a lead instructor at the Institute of Restorative Health. I'm sitting in today for Margaret, and joining me is Dr. Julie Greenberg, who is one of my favorite educators. I think I've probably attended just about every webinar she's presented, so I couldn't be more excited to have her here with our community today. Dr. Julie Greenberg is a licensed naturopathic doctor and registered herbalist specializing in functional dermatology. She is the founder of the Center for Integrative and Naturopathic Dermatology, a holistic medical clinic dedicated to identifying and treating the root causes of skin and hair disorders. She also founded rootcausedermatology.com, an educational platform that trains functional medicine practitioners in evidence-based approaches to dermatologic care. Dr. Greenberg holds degrees from Northwestern University, Stanford University, and Bastyr University. She is the co-author of the Holistic Psoriasis Management and Nutrition Guide, the first comprehensive text on natural approaches to psoriasis treatment. Dr. Greenberg is a respected educator and innovator who teaches dermatology at several naturopathic medical schools and lectures internationally. She is a highly sought after speaker at integrative and functional medicine conferences across the US and abroad, and we are truly lucky to have her here today. So welcome, Dr. Greenberg.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Well, I think, as you and I were chatting, we could probably do multiple podcast episodes about, every skin condition, right? But today, I really would love for us to kind of paint in broader strokes and really begin to lay the foundation for the power of and honestly need for a functional approach to dermatology. So I would love to just start with you first. What brought you into the dermatology space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I like to say that the way I got into dermatology was a very naturopathic entry, in that it was actually through another organ. It was through my thyroid, but as we know, as functional medicine practitioners, it's all connected. So, I had gone to business school and graduated and was kind of having, some vague symptoms, weight loss, thinning hair, tired. I know a lot of the clinicians out there already thinking thyroid. And so I had Hashimoto's. It took a little bit to get diagnosed. And that was really my late 20s was really my first experience with, more of a chronic illness. And first time I really took an interest in my health. And I was so disappointed by conventional medicine saying, well, we don't know what causes, Hashimoto's, why you're attacking and killing your thyroid. We can't fix it. Here, take this medicine. You're probably just going to be tired and overweight for the rest of your life. And that was, pretty devastating for someone in their late 20s to hear. And I thought that just can't be right. Or aren't we supposed to be one of the best healthcare systems in the world? So I started doing research and, learning about our food system. And then I was learning about endocrine disruptors and all the personal care products that we put on our skin, particularly women, but men as well. And at this point, it was up to, over 200 chemicals that we were putting on our skin a day. And the more I researched, the more I got into trying to make my own skincare products to be clean and not have what I was putting on my skin, disrupt my thyroid even more. And then I just became completely obsessed with skin. And that really was kind of the impetus to go back to naturopathic medical school and become a doctor and focus on dermatology. So it was my thyroid that got me there.
Oh, similar story. My thyroid too. And we hear that so much, right? Yeah, so the chemical concoctions, right, or non-chemical concoctions in your bathroom, right? Like all the probably started out with some coconut oil originally, jojoba oil, all that stuff that now probably I'm sure you have thoughts on all of those things as ingredients. But so that's really interesting. I'm curious, beyond your education and experience as a naturopathic doctor and herbalist, what other sort of areas of focus do you feel have been most complementary to, your work in a dermatology practice or dermatology space?
Yeah. So obviously, as we've already discussed, the systems are all connected. For me, I think the other system that I focus on the most heavily because it so impacts the skin is the gut. So I'm involved in like the Naturopathic Gastroenterology organization. I help plan the conference every year. I do a lot of reading and learning about the whole gastro tract. But it's interesting is when I treat my patients, they may mention something like they're having sleep trouble, or they're having a lot of UTIs, or a lot of bladder and a lot of yeast infections, vaginal yeast infections, or, it's kind of everything gets tied in. And while I'm definitely not a primary care physician, I really focus exclusively on the skin and the gut. I do end up kind of touch points with these other body systems, because a lot of times it's so connected that it's easy to fix those things because of the things that we're working on. But if I had to pick one, it would be the GI tract.
The GI tract. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that makes a ton of sense. And that's kind of where we start our journey at the Institute of Restorative Health. Is our educational journey is the gut, right? Because it's so central to everything else, which I know we'll get into. So in your practice, obviously we know that there are many different skin conditions, hair and skin, right? But what are some of the most common conditions that you treat with your patients?
Yeah, so I would say that there's a handful I'm just treating all the time. And I think they kind of mirror the epidemiology, the population and the percentage of people that are dealing with it. The top two skin conditions I see would be acne and eczema. I also see a lot of like psoriasis and rosacea, dandruff, so sebderm of the scalp and skin that can be actually quite severe, and a lot of hair loss, either androgenic alopecia, which is more of that hormonally related, but I treat a lot of alopecia areata, which is an autoimmune disease that is the attack on the hair follicle. So probably the ones I named are the ones I end up seeing the most. I tend not to do so much of like the rare and unusual. And because I'm a naturopathic doctor and because I'm telemedicine, skin cancers are not in my scope of practice. So I don't do like mole checks or skin cancers or anything like that.
That makes sense. It makes sense. So just as a side note, do you have a favorite of those? Like any in particular that you find especially rewarding for you?
It's so hard to pick, because I think if you've never suffered from one of these chronic skin diseases, or you haven't treated it as a clinician, it's easy to kind of overlook it and say like, oh, it's just eczema. And people may just conjure up the image of like, a patch right here. And it's like, okay, no big deal. And then what they don't know though is that, I've had patients who can't work, are depressed, are suicidal. When it's pediatric eczema, the whole family is up at night. The whole family can't sleep. It's very traumatic for parents to have an infant or young child with eczema and feel pretty hopeless. So, eczema can be life-changing for people to help clear that up. Then acne, I think people also think like, oh, it's just a cosmetic thing. Like you just got a pimple or two. But again, anything that's on the face suddenly becomes a lot more severe. And a lot of us still think of, oh, well, acne is kind of a teenage thing, but adult acne is on the rise. So I treat a lot of adults with acne as well. And it's anytime you have something on your face, I mean, that's the way you're presenting to the world. And it's not just vanity. It's not just a cosmetic issue. It can also be very deep and cystic and painful. I bet it can get in the way of dating. I mean, I've had many patients who say, oh, I can start dating again now. I mean, it was stopping them from finding a partner in life, or even setting a wedding date. And again, depression, anxiety, even suicidal ideation. The hair loss, the alopecia areata, when somebody is totally bald, whether they're kids, a lot of kids will get made fun of at school and teachers have to step in. It's not that kids are trying to be mean. They just part of being a kid, if somebody's different, they're going to get made fun of. Or adults, again, trying to get jobs. And we know that there's discrimination in the workplace for men and women who have that alopecia areata. People think they're sick. They're not sure. They don't want to hire them. So they're all so impactful and rewarding. And it's one of those fields where so often at the first visit, people are crying at the first visit because they are just so devastated, and a lot of them are hopeless at that point, and it's so impactful to their lives, and they don't feel like, they're not sure if it can ever be fixed. And then I like to say at the last visit, they're crying because they're happy and grateful. And just last week, I had 2 patients cry at our last visits because they didn't want to leave, which we all want as doctors. Most people don't love seeing their doctor, but hopefully we've done so much to help them and have such a good relationship that it's a happy and a sad day when they have to stop seeing us. So it's very rewarding.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they could all be your favorite, right? It's really just rewarding across the board. And I think you bring up a really unique thing about dermatology in particular is that that is how you're presenting to the world, right? So it isn't just this physical condition. I mean, the statistics around the emotional impacts of these things are pretty, pretty stark, right? And so I think it is an opportunity to not just make a difference in people's physical health, but in their whole existence in the world, which is huge.
Yeah. I mean, we have that expression, right? Feeling comfortable in your own skin. We're not literally talking about that. We're talking about, how you feel, but it's perfect, because if you are not comfortable in your own skin, you're not going to be a comfortable person. You're going to be, a lot of kids have a lot of anger issues and tantrums when they have eczema. And it's like, in order to feel comfortable in your own skin, you first have to feel comfortable in your skin. So yeah.
So true. So true. So I'm curious, thinking about some of those top conditions that you treat, and we might have to kind of break this down by category, but I'm wondering if you could speak to what you see as some of the most common root causes, right? Or those most common underlying factors with these chronic skin conditions. And absolutely feel free to categorize that if you need to, although I would imagine that there are probably some through lines across all of them.
Yes, there are through lines, and then there are differences in specifics. So the through line for all of them is that, as we've talked about the gut, our GI tract, it is really the foundation of health. That's why, your institute starts with so much of the field of naturopathic and functional medicine. It starts with the gut, and you never stop, right? Because we have to. And we learn more and more every day, literally, about the microbes in our gut and how our gut microbiome controls every facet of our health. There's studies that just came out on multiple sclerosis, on Alzheimer's, just name it. It has to do with the gut microbiome. And we know that the gut microbiome is really one of the key things that regulates our immune system. And again, with these dermatologic diseases, we think of them like, oh, okay, I can see the psoriasis on the skin or the acne, but it's not just skin deep. These are inflammatory systemic conditions. It's a system-wide problem. And so they all really do begin in the gut. And that is the way I start with all patients is, looking at the gut microbiome with testing, and we can get into what I do. So that's the throughput for all of them, no matter what somebody walks in to my office with. Again, I specialize only in derm, so like hair, skin, and nails. I know we're going to do gut microbiome testing, and I know I'm going to find things. That's the common thread. What was interesting, which I didn't anticipate when I first started, was that I started to see different patterns by diseases. So there's a certain profile I tend to see in eczema patients, and I call that the eczema gut. That is very different than, for example, what I tend to see in my acne patients for the acne gut. So yeah, when I first started, I just thought, oh, well, everybody's an individual. We know we have to treat them as an individual. So I'm going to go in and see what's happening with their gut. And of course, I still do that with every patient. But I was really, really surprised to start to see patterns in some of these diseases. And they were very distinct what was going on. And then trying to break down, like, okay, why am I seeing, these different patterns? What is it that's going on? Again, in eczema versus acne. And so it was interesting and helpful to do that testing and get to the point where I could see patterns.
And so thinking about those patterns, and I love how you sort of categorize those, right? The eczema gut and the acne gut, for example. What are some of the like glaring things that you see where you're like, yep, this fits into my category of an eczema gut? What are some of the main things that stand out when you're reviewing those GI tests?
Yeah, so I would say a leaky gut I really expect to see that in eczema. And I know a lot of clinicians do different testing for, intestinal permeability. Some use a zonulin marker. I do a stool test, and I do an oat or an organic acid test. On the stool test, specifically for eczema, I tend to see low or no Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, low or no Akkermansia muciniphila, and a low secretory IgA. And for me, that is a pattern of leaky gut. I don't do zonulin because, it is just one marker. Sometimes it shows up as high, sometimes it won't. I think for all of us, our patients are very smart. They're out there, they're researching, they want information. And so a lot of my patients will know something like about a zonulin marker. And if it's not high, then they'll say, well, then I don't have a leaky gut. And that's not true at all. The Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, of course, is a keystone species for short chain fatty acid producer. It's a butyrate producer, and we know that butyrate helps calm the immune system in the gut. It helps tighten, seal up those tight junctions between our enterocytes in the gut, and it helps fight leaky gut. And then the Akkermansia muciniphila, of course, it's in the name, mucinophile or mucus lover. It's responsible for helping maintain that mucosal barrier in our gut, which of course is key to not having leaky gut. And so those two keystone species being low or not found, and then the secretory IgA or immunoglobulins, of course, is the immune system of our mucosal surfaces, like the gut, secreted in that mucosal lining. And when there's not sufficient amounts, that also tells me that there's likely leaky gut. So those three are my kind of leaky gut picture. And again, I see low or no Akkermansia, low or no Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, and usually low secretory IgA in eczema. And then for the overgrowth component of the eczema, I usually see some Staph aureus and strep species overgrown, and then Candida overgrown. But that is one reason why I like to use the oat in conjunction with the stool test, is that I find that the stool test doesn't do as good a job with fungal organisms. It does a great job with bacterial organisms. I can see what I need, but the fungal piece is really so important in the GI tract. It got overlooked for a really long time. We would just call it SIBO, when a lot of it was either fungal overgrowth or both bacterial and fungal. And so I find that the oat organic acid test, which is a urine test, it's a little bit of an exercise in biochemistry. So it's harder for clinicians to kind of get rolling and learn how to use it. But once you do, I find it's really helpful for fungal and like toxic component pieces, which can show up as well. So yeah, that's the eczema gut, is not enough of the good guys, this leaky gut, and then overgrowth. But, you know, I still need to test every patient, because everybody, even though there's like that pattern, you know, I need to see, are they insufficiency dysbiosis, meaning with their commensal organisms, okay, maybe the Akkermansia and the Faecalibacterium are low, but are basically the other commensals good? Or is everything low, you know, what we call insufficiency dysbiosis? Or maybe there's a whole bunch of stuff overgrown also on the bacterial side, like maybe they have Morganella, Klebsiella, or Citrobacter, which are high histamine producers, and that's going to drive the eczema forward even more. Maybe there's Pseudomonas, which, you know, I really don't like. It's a big LPS or endotoxin producer. So it's still important, even with patterns, for me to go in and test each and every patient and know specifically what's happening with them.
That's super helpful. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
So that gives us an idea of that eczema gut, right? What about, we'll go with the acne gut, since you mentioned that one earlier. What is different there? What are you commonly seeing?
Yeah, so it's really different. And those kind of being the two most common diseases, it was interesting to see what a difference there was. I don't really see, by and large, again, generally, I'm not seeing the leaky gut picture. You know, again, it's not saying that an individual with acne can't have leaky gut, but by and large, I'm really not seeing leaky gut within like the whole population of acne patients. Instead, what I'm seeing is H. pylori, growth, and candida. And then half of the patients will have protozoa. And I kind of put all protozoa together. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a giardia. It could be, you know, some of the ones that they're in a little bit of the gray zone for functional medicine practitioners, things like Dientamoeba fragilis or Entamoeba coli. You know, those one, Blastocystis hominis. I know there's a debate both about those and H. pylori. Well, are they commensal? Are they bad? Do we want them? But I tend to really see them in that acne population and work on getting rid of them both. So,
okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that gives us an idea of those couple of things. So, I would love to you've mentioned a couple of tests, stool testing and the oat or an oat. So let's sort of back out, and I would love to hear just from the very beginning, right? I'm a new patient coming to you. What are some of the main assessment tools? And it doesn't have to just be testing, right? I mean, whatever you use, what are some of the main assessment tools you use when beginning your work with a patient? And, you know, are there things that hands down you are going to do with everybody who walks in your door, which you've already kind of answered a little bit, but yeah, I'm sure you might have more to add to that.
Yeah, well, so I'm a practitioner that I practice 100% telemedicine, and people are often surprised to hear that. Like, wait, what, dermatology? Like, can you do that? And the answer is yes. But the first tool that I absolutely need from patients, and I'll say that, so when a patient gets on my schedule, there's usually a 2 to 3 month wait to see me. I'm usually about closed to new patients half the year. And when I'm open, there's going to be a 2 or 3 month wait. So the first thing, you know, I'll ask for is photos. Patients need to upload photos of every place that they're having trouble. And, you know, I really need to see it because the video, you know, even though it's a Zoom visit, it's not going to be good enough for me to really be able to see it. But even when I used to be in person, I still needed it for the records, because you'd be surprised how quickly people forget and we forget exactly what things look like. Or, you know, it's not always a straight line healing. So it's not like, oh, well, you started off with like really severe eczema, and then each and every visit, you know, it only got better and better. No, there can be flares, and remembering those flares and documenting it. So whether somebody is telemedicine or not, I recommend that as a practitioner treating derm, you always get photos. And even if the area is clear, if it's an area that we've been treating, I want a picture of it being clear to really mark it so that we can look back and say, okay, that really was clear, or maybe there was like a little niggle or something. So everybody's going to upload photos before every visit. And as we talked about, we're going to order the testing before the first visit. So I'm lucky in that I have the lab results to review with patients at the first visit. Because there's this long wait period to see me, we take advantage of that. And they do the stool test and the oat. And then I'm going to have the photos, the stool test, and the oat, and I'm going to review it with them. And with photos for clinicians, if you're practicing derm via telemedicine, I always share my screen with the patients, and we go over the photos and we talk through them. And you can get very good at noticing things on photos, but I talk through it with the patient to make sure I'm seeing everything that's there, everything that they want me to see. But everyone has a phone, everyone has a camera. They're really good at taking photos. The only areas where people tend to need a little bit of assistance is the scalp. So if it's hair loss or maybe like scalp psoriasis or something, they're going to need somebody to help them take the picture. But otherwise, people are pretty good with taking pictures with their phone. So yeah, those are the kind of baseline for everybody: photos and lab results for the first visit. And of course, there's an intake questionnaire before I see them.
Oh yes, I'm sure the health history is, that's an important piece of this too, right? There's so much we can glean just from people's story and timeline and when did this start. And, we often tell our students at IRH, like that is, that's not just this obligatory thing that you do, right? Asking those questions. There's so much that you can learn about your client or patient. Okay, so that's very helpful. So, walking in the door, right? You have, I'm imagining GI map. Is that your most?
Yes, so I use the GI map by Diagnostic Solutions Lab, and then I use the OAT by Mosaic, formerly Great Plains. Yeah, so for every patient, I have that. Now, once we have, the first, visit and we get the whole clinical history and we see the lab results, then I may do secondary testing. That could be blood work, looking at anything from like, vitamin D to thyroid function, iron levels, whatever. But other functional medicine testing, I do a fair amount of hormone testing as well. So I use the Dutch test for that, which is another dried urine test. And especially with my autoimmune patients, like alopecia areata, I kind of put psoriasis on that bucket. Toxins can play a big role. I do a lot of mycotoxin testing as well. So I see a lot of mold and mycotoxin problems in patients as well. And that really does drive a lot of derm problems and gut and immune problems as well. So I think those are the, after doing the GI map and the OAT, probably the Dutch, the mycotoxin. My eczema patients, sometimes they haven't done allergy testing in a while. So Diagnostic Solutions also has an IgE Allergy Explorer, which is a blood test for IgE, true allergic reactions, just making sure we're not exacerbating the eczema if it's been a long time since they've done testing. But yeah, I mean, there's other tests that I use as well.
Yeah, just as needed. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the allergy testing. I'm curious, and there's a lot of, I would say there's like a good bit of debate in the functional space about the food sensitivity testing and when to use it, when not to use it, all of that. I'm curious, do you ever do food sensitivity testing? Or, if not, have you not seen it be particularly valuable? I just would be curious how that fits into your suite of tests.
Yes. Many people are surprised to learn that I do not do any food sensitivity testing. So no IgA food, no IgG or IgG subtypes. I don't. And the reason is this, particularly, I feel like it's the eczema crew in particular that does a lot. I mean, not that others don't, like, psoriasis and stuff as well, but I've got a couple issues with the food sensitivity testing. I wish it was more consistent. I think there's been a lot of examples where somebody has used the same blood sample and sent it in to the same lab under different names, or the same blood draw and then sent it into different labs, and the results are just kind of all over the board. And so that makes me, a little suspicious of the results that I'm getting when we can't duplicate it. I always want to be a good steward for my patients' finances. I am well aware that I am a cash practitioner. I am very expensive for them to see. The labs are cash. The supplements and herbs are cash. Like, this is all a very costly endeavor. And I think as clinicians, we need to be good stewards of our patients' finances. So I don't want to order tests that I don't feel like I can rely and action on the answers. The other thing is, if a patient has a leaky gut, then what I've seen is that just absolutely everything shows up high. And I think that that's true in many ways, because if you have a leaky gut and you get food proteins getting through, the barrier, the mucosal barrier, the tight junctions, and it starts getting into the bloodstream, you are going to start having some immune reactions because the food proteins don't belong there. It's because of the leaky gut that they're there. And I have so many eczema patients that when they first come in, they absolutely have a ton of food sensitivities. So I'm not saying that food sensitivities don't exist. Of course they do. It's just, can we accurately test for them using it? I feel like a lot of my patients know, especially with eczema, well, every time I eat, whatever, I'm going to get a flare. And so, I like to do gentle food eliminations. I don't like restricting patients' diets beyond what they need. So if we know something is making them flare, yes, let's cut that out for right now. Again, IgE or true food allergy testing, I do think can be helpful. That is easily quantifiable and tested on a lab. So I do want to know about those if they're unaware, haven't been tested in a long time. But the nice thing I think with food sensitivities is, so often when we clean up the leaky gut and re-heal it, a lot of those food sensitivities, they're not an issue anymore. Or the dose dependency, the bar has completely changed. Whereas before, if they would take a bite of an egg in any form, their eczema was going to go crazy. Now it's like, oh, you know what? I can have eggs on the weekend, no problem. As long as I don't eat eggs every day for breakfast, I can do eggs on the weekend and nothing happens. And that is healing up the gut and lowering the food sensitivities in the person. So yeah, I wish if there was a food sensitivity test where I really felt like it was really reliable and dependable. Once a patient's gut, once I felt like it was no longer leaky, I would love to be able to run that. I don't have that. And I also think we know that our relationship and our reactions to food are so complicated. And I like to use EOE or eosinophilic esophagitis as a good example. We know that is food driven. And yet, if you do IgE or IgA or IgG testing on people with EOE, oftentimes nothing will show up. They say absolutely zero reactions. Okay, great. But we know from using endoscopy and biopsies, we can pinpoint, okay, for you it's gluten, for you it's dairy, for you it's soy, and that is causing this, attack of eosinophils in the esophagus, and yet we can't test for it. So our relationship and our reactions to food are so complex, and it would be great if there was a way to reliably test for all of it, but I just don't think that there is right now. So
the Clinician's Corner podcast is sponsored by the Institute of Restorative Health, the premier clinical training program for health practitioners who want to learn how to finally get to the root source of their clients' health concerns and help them reverse complex health challenges and chronic illness. You can't afford to keep guessing. Your clients can't afford it either. Today's clients are sicker than ever before. Their health histories are more complex than ever, and you simply can't deliver results they need or build the practice you desire without the right clinical skills. Enter the Institute of Restorative Health. Our clinically proven, systematic approach to restoring balance within the body has helped thousands of practitioners transform their clients' lives, grow their business, and change the way health is delivered. Study with us to develop and master the clinical skills and confidence you need to help your clients feel better, faster. Learn how to work with advanced lab testing to identify imbalances, craft custom targeted protocols that truly resolve your clients' health issues, and deliver consistently life-changing results. Visit instituteofrestorativehealth.com to apply today and secure your spot.
And I know, and I've heard you speak about this before too, but there is not a ton of great data or information in the literature directly connecting specific foods to certain conditions. I think, some that we know of, and I would love for you to speak to this, but dairy, I think, is one that gets a little bit more attention, especially in the context of acne. But, I know that there is also that question, right, of for some of these conditions, how big of a role are these foods playing? And it sounds like, you have other ways of sort of exploring that and finding those triggers. I'm also curious, thinking about beyond food sensitivities, just thinking about nutrition and thinking about blood sugar dysregulation, for example, right? And we can kind of start to talk about some of those deeper connections and driving factors. I'm curious, is that something that you explore frequently with your patients? And I would imagine that comes up a good bit with acne, but I'd be curious, moving away from food sensitivities and exploring other nutrition, nutritional considerations, how are you fitting that in with your work?
Yes. So of course, as a naturopathic doctor, as a functional medicine practitioner, food plays a whole, huge role, right? I mean, it is so much of the foundation of building and maintaining the correct gut microbiome. So, we have to talk about it. I would say pretty much for all patients, I focus a lot on fiber and hitting fiber goals for patients. Unless they have SIBO and it's really at the beginning, the fiber is very hard for them to handle. Fiber is just going to do good things for their system and their gut microbiome. And even if they have SIBO, eventually you got to get them on fiber and plants. So, there's nothing that a good, healthy, plant-heavy diet isn't going to do to help inflamed patients, really, of any kind. So we focus a lot on that. And by focusing on fiber and plants and the healthy foods, it naturally starts to kick out some of the not so great foods, because you've only got so much room in your stomach. And if you're filling it with good, nutritious, fibrous foods, you're going to fill up and be satiated, as opposed to, who hasn't, opened a bag of large chips and suddenly it's, there's a funny Drew Barrymore movie where she wakes up in the morning, she's like, who ate my pie? And it's like that, like, who ate my bag of chips? Like, oh, I just ate the entire bag of chips, right? We know that with these addictive foods, there's no nutritional value. They're crafted to keep you eating. And so it's so much easier to kind of fill up on that stuff. So instead of being like, don't eat chips, don't eat cookies, and going through that whole thing, we focus on getting the fiber in. And I think that naturally kicks out some of the bad stuff. But by disease, yeah, I definitely have a list of foods where we may cut it out at the beginning just for everybody. Or I just know that it's just, they're going to have to cut it out. And you mentioned dairy, and dairy is a big one. But it does kind of vary by disease, and foods can vary. And you can get really differing results. Like in psoriasis, I think, we don't think of gluten as sometimes the best food, and we know it can be connected to autoimmune, but we know with psoriasis patients, there can be a dramatic reaction to cutting out gluten where like, that was it. Somebody cut out gluten and like a miracle, the psoriasis clears up. And I mean, that's really it. That's all they had to do was cut out gluten, miracle. But for most people, that's not going to happen with psoriasis. There are, some who, if they cut out gluten, it's going to help and their psoriasis will get better, but that's not the only factor. It doesn't clear up their psoriasis. And I do think that there's other people where cutting out gluten doesn't do anything for their psoriasis. It really doesn't. And so again, I'm not in the business of trying to restrict somebody's diet or cut out foods for no particular reason. So I do really want to explore foods by disease, where appropriate, what are we cutting out and what are we not, but still with that underpinning of my target for my adult patients is 35 grams of fiber a day, 30 different plants a week, and eating the rainbow. And that I think as a foundation is going to be helpful. And I've had plenty of instances, and I'm sure many of your clinicians have this, where, I have patients upload prior lab work. Obviously, I review that before the first visit, or if they're getting, testing as we go, I'm always wanting them to upload their labs so I can see it. And so many times I've looked at patients' labs and I'll see like a hemoglobin A1C of 5.6 or something. And so when we, meet at the visit, I'm like, oh, I noticed you had some blood work done recently. Great. Did your doctor talk to you about it? Oh, they just said everything looked fine. And I'm like, oh, really? Did they mention to you this marker? And I'll pull it up and show them. I'll say, this is what's called the hemoglobin A1C. And I'll explain to them, it's a kind of a 3-month average of, your blood sugar levels. And you're at a 5.6. And did they discuss with you that 5.7 is the cutoff for pre-diabetes? Like, you're just on the line. Nope, didn't mention it, and look, I feel for our conventional practitioner brethren out there. I don't know how people see, 40 patients a day. I was just at a wedding this weekend talking to a conventional practitioner who said that they had eased up their schedule and were only seeing 25 patients a day. So that sounds insane to me. I mean, they have to be suffering from fatigue. So I can understand they don't have the time, they don't have the luxury that we have as functional medicine practitioners, the time to sit down with patients and really incorporate their whole person health. No, I'm not in charge of their blood sugar. I'm not their primary care physician. I'm doing derm, but no, I'm also not going to let a 5.6 go and just say, well, that's not my realm. And so often, I know people listening are shaking their heads yes. By focusing on these foundations of health, we see all these benefits, right? Their hemoglobin A1C starts to come down. Their blood pressure comes down. The cholesterol will start to come down. It's like it really is all related. So I do try to pick up on that kind of stuff and help out. I'm not going to manage their diabetes for sure. But again, just focusing on fiber. And then, depending on like their hemoglobin A1C, their weight, their status, we may also discuss, okay, maybe max 1 fruit a day, because people can get a little carried away with the fruit too. And that may be okay for some people and not for others. But the patients who see us, they really want to do a good job for their health and their body. We can all, fall off the wagon and need reminding for sure, but they really want to do a good job. And sometimes they just really don't know. And they've never been told, hey, you are on the edge of prediabetes. And just that conversation wakes them up and gets them, thinking about, okay, do I need to put this in my mouth, or is there something else I could opt in for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there were some really sort of mind-blowing statistics that I think Stanford put out, a few years ago, about just how frequently that happens, where this pre-diabetes conversation gets missed, right? And then when it does happen, the sort of support and follow-up and education around that, there's just not time for that. And we don't have that sort of built into our conventional system, which I think is, again, kind of thinking about how in the functional space, like you said, we have the luxury of time, and we have the luxury of being able to provide that sort of deeper, more comprehensive, and holistic support to explain what that marker even means and how that relates to what they're eating. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that we probably all see across the board. And those statistics, really, I wish I could quote it exactly. It was like, oh my gosh, that was mind blowing. So that's great. So, dietary considerations are really sort of condition dependent and are really patient dependent, and might be hugely impactful for one and not as impactful for another. And we know that is only a piece of the puzzle. So I would love to tap into just a couple of those other kind of deeper common drivers that you see. So we've talked a little bit about food. We've, touched on the importance of the gut and different kind of patterns that we see in the gut. And so I would love to touch on some of those other things, and then maybe talk about, I'll watch the time, but maybe we can talk about then how do we put this together in a meaningful way for our clients or patients. So a couple of things that you already kind of brought up, but I'm pulling these out because I think they're buzzwords right now, and so I think they're of particular interest to a lot of people. But thinking about histamine and the mast cells, right? And you mentioned, like, on a GI map, for example, some of the histamine producing bacteria that we're able to identify there. I'm curious, and I've been on a deep rabbit hole research dive myself on this topic and its relationship to so many skin conditions. But I would love to hear a little bit about, do you see that showing up in these skin conditions that you're treating? And, are there places where you see histamine or mast cell activation syndrome, for example? Are there places where you see that showing up more than others?
I would say eczema is the number one condition that is going to be the most histamine related. I don't treat MCAS, partially because I think the treatment of MCAS, even in the functional medicine world, it still feels very symptom management and suppressive to me. I practice in California, Oregon, and Washington. And as naturopathic doctors, our scope of practice varies greatly with whatever state we're licensed in. I think because I started in California, where our prescriptive rights are very narrow, I learned how to treat all of these conditions without any pharmaceuticals. And I'm glad actually I started in California for that. So even for my Washington and Oregon patients, I'm really almost never prescribing anything pharmaceutical. And so much of MCAS, I feel like it's prescription and cholestyramine and stuff like that. So I don't treat MCAS. Some of my eczema patients, especially the TSW or topical steroid withdrawal or really big flares, I think they could be on that, high histamine MCAS line. But again, I think the question, that we're always asking as functional medicine practitioners is like, well, what is the root cause though? What is driving this? And so I still am going to go back to the gut and, what I see in there and treating it, and other allergens, driving a histamine response, which is why I might do like an IgE allergy explorer. May send a patient to an allergist or dermatologist to get patch testing. There's different types of allergy testing. So there's IgE, where you can test those reactions in the blood to food and environmental factors, whether it's like tree pollens or mouse urine or mites, dust mites. A lot of eczema patients have real big allergy to dust mites. There's patch testing that's more for contact allergens, like things in personal care products. There's skin prick testing. So finding that out, those are going to all be histamine drivers. But I don't take on just classic MCAS patients or manage it in that way. Because I still think that if you find and treat the root cause, you're not going to have high histamine. And at the beginning, I used to try to do low histamine diets, especially with my eczema patients. But it's pretty hard. And like my poor eczema patients, they're already dealing with so much. I mean, you mentioned dairy. I have yet to meet the eczema patient who dairy is helping them. So pretty much we're off of dairy. Once patients are fully cleared of eczema and have been clear for a while, they are welcome to start experimenting with dairy. And we've had many negotiations, but it's A2, but it's raw, but it's 100% grass-fed. Maybe not. Once the skin is clear, then they can try and see if they can tolerate, different forms of dairy or how much. But until they're clear, dairy's out. Same with acne as well. But yeah, histamine, I think is, it's a real big factor in the eczema world. But if I can regulate their gut, I don't have to worry about what they're eating and trying to get a low histamine diet. Because there's been studies trying to test the histamine in foods. And we know, okay, don't eat smoked fish. But the same food, the same leftover can have really dramatic differing levels of histamine. And so it's just very hard to have a patient go through that and then not even know if they're on a low histamine diet at the end of the day. So
it is a difficult diet to follow for sure.
it's very hard.
It's
And the diamine enzyme, the DAO enzyme is very expensive, and I haven't seen it do a lot. See, and I don't think the problem is that most people are not deficient in that enzyme. It's just that the system is so overwhelmed with gut microbes, and we haven't even talked about skin microbes, but of course skin microbiome plays a huge role as well. If we can balance everything out, the histamine is going to calm down. I mean, dandruff, we know, why is dandruff itchy? The histamine levels are about twice the level of healthy scalp, and that is due to a commensal microbe on the scalp called Malassezia, which is a yeast. But this Malassezia gets overgrown and the immune system starts overreacting to it. And so you're going to produce a lot of histamine and get itchy. Well, if we can lower the colony of Malassezia and get the skin microbiome on the scalp normalized, the histamine will go back to normal. So always trying to get the root cause. So I'm not trying to manage the histamine. I'm trying to manage the drivers of the histamine.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Like the whole idea of not just putting a Band-Aid on it, right? I mean, sometimes, of course, there's symptom management, but really trying to understand why this is happening in the first place.
Right.
That makes tons of sense. So, and one other thing, you already mentioned this earlier, and we can touch on this, and I think it also, talking about histamine, it's a nice way to segue into this, but you said that you see a lot of toxin exposure or issues with mycotoxins in your patients, and is that primarily mycotoxins, or can it be other things as well?
The most toxin testing I do is mycotoxin testing. I do use some labs for environmental toxin testing, and every lab seems to have their own panel of environmental toxins that varies from other ones. But I have seen some higher levels of kind of general toxins. I mean, I'm not an environmental medicine specialist, so I'm not doing that as much. The mycotoxin is definitely the one I do the most, and I see a lot of mold and mycotoxin. The oat gives me a clue as to whether, plus of course the clinical history. Obviously if there's a history of water damage or mold, but most people, if you say, is there mold in your home? No, there's definitely no mold. Well, maybe not. But yeah, I think the problem is that we build our homes out of food for mold. So that's already there. We know that there's mold everywhere. If you leave berries in the fridge too long, if you leave bread out on the counter too long, what happens? It gets moldy. Where did it get that mold? There's spores all around us. I mean, that's just part of living on planet Earth. And then building our homes out of dead trees, food for mold, all that needs to happen is a crack with water. And it can, I explain to patients, this is not a cleanliness level of your home. You just need a leak behind the wall. You'll never see it. There could absolutely be a whole colony back there, I wouldn't see it. I wouldn't know about it. Sometimes you smell musty odor, sometimes you don't. So I do think that mold and mycotoxins end up being a problem for people. And just because you live in a desert or a dry area doesn't mean that you couldn't have mold. So
yeah, one of my clients actually does live in an arid desert climate, and honestly, has had one of the most probably the worst mycotoxin test I've seen, right? So you're right. You don't have to know it's there. The climate doesn't always matter, right? It's pretty sneaky, but that is definitely something that you're saying play a large role kind of across conditions, and throughout your patient population.
Yeah. And the worst, if it's an eczema patient who's got lupus, or anytime there's autoimmune, my alopecia areata patients, I'm almost know 100% that there's mold and mycotoxins when I first, start to see them. It just, autoimmune disease, it's so common that we think of it as being normal, but it's the farthest thing from normal. Job one of anybody's body is don't attack and kill self. Keep self alive, right? but this whole, millions of years of evolution and biology is to get us to be, faster and smarter and more alive, to be alive longer. And when a body is attacking and killing self, that is so shocking, right? That is so against millions of years of evolution. And, when we ask ourselves, well, why does this happen? I really think it's that the immune system is so overwhelmed. And I kind of explain it to patients, like, let's say you're sitting at home, you have a cat, you hear a glass break in the kitchen. You're not going to automatically assume that you're being invaded and jump up and grab a gun or a knife and start, stabbing and shooting. You're going to probably say, oh, that was probably my cat or something, right? That's going to be your initial thought. But if you're sitting at home and I tell you tonight at 10:03 p.m., you're going to hear the glass break and someone is coming for you, right? You're sitting there waiting and you're just like, oh my God. And you hear anything and you're just going to completely freak out. And that's like what the immune system is basically, it's overtaxed. It's over threatened. There's too much going on and it's just firing, all cylinders and all cannons at everything. And, I think it just kind of mistakes tissue. And if we can calm the immune system down, not because I think Western medicine takes it as, well, the immune system has just gone out of whack and there's no reason for it. So let's do biologics and suppress the immune system. No, there's a reason for it. It's mold, it's mycotoxins, it's dysbiosis, environmental toxins, mercury, lead. The body is reacting to something real. And so we need to find it and get rid of that so that the immune system can calm itself down, because just suppressing it didn't ever fix that problem. And mold and mycotoxins, I think as practitioners, I feel like we're all seeing it more and more. So
100%. I would completely agree with that. And it's really interesting too, just anecdotally, I will share, my practice, a lot of it has been working with women with Hashimoto's. And I have found that in nearly every single one of those cases, there has been a mold or, mold and mycotoxin situation. And so I think what you're saying, it really tracks and resonates. And I would imagine for things then like, psoriasis, right, where there is that autoimmune element, or like you mentioned, the alopecia, right? Like those things where you're thinking about the immune connection or this autoimmune component, I would imagine that the mold and mycotoxins are probably one of the first things you're thinking about.
Yeah.
Okay. So, then kind of going from that, right? When you're working with these complex cases where, you've started with, stool testing and you've done an OAT and, maybe you have results from other tests and you just have these really complex cases where perhaps there's dysbiosis, perhaps there's mycotoxins, perhaps there's dysglycemia. How do you decide where to go first? How do you start to put that information into action steps for your patients?
Yeah. I think that's where, the art meets science of medicine. And it's just having worked through hundreds and thousands of treatment plans and, working with patients and seeing what worked best, but, still always keeping in mind that there's individuals. I have patients where there may be a lot going on, but I can throw like multiple herbal formulas at them at the same time and they're going to be fine. And other patients where there's not even that much going on, but they have such a sensitive constitution or vis, we call it in naturopathic medicine, that, I've got to start with like a one herb formula, just one herb and kind of take it from there. But, most of my patients are pretty healthy and, I like to both go after the overgrowth and, the healing at the same time. And so, we're known for it, but as a naturopathic doctor, I feel like I have pretty robust plans. And I always tell practitioners, if you want the best patients, the most motivated, the ones that will stick to plan and do everything, see derm patients, because they're the best. They are very motivated. They are there to learn, to do it, to clear it. And even though my plans are, 3 times a day, multi-supplement and herb dosing, at least 3 times a day. If I'm doing H. pylori, it can be more than that because that's on an empty stomach. They'll do it. And that's part of, I've developed protocols and plans for each disease. So I kind of know baseline where to start for each one. And I do have a course at Root Cause Dermatology. If any of your practitioners are interested in doing a deep dive and treating derm patients. But yeah, I think that's the beauty of functional medicine, is that there's so many ways to approach it, and learning from people who have put together, processes for working through the conditions, or, just working with patients and thinking through what you think makes sense. There's so many different ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have just a couple of more questions for you. And I do want to talk about your program, but I have one, question before we get to that. Thinking about working with these patients or clients, I feel like the timeline for skin conditions can sometimes feel very daunting, right? Because it can often be, I feel like those are some of the conditions that can be slowest to budge. And like you said earlier, they're not linear. And so I'd be curious to hear how you explain that to a client or a patient, rather, that you're starting this journey with. How do you explain this longer process to them in a way that keeps them hopeful and keeps them engaged, and compliant? Because we know that consistency is just so important. But I think that is one of the trickier things with skin, and I would love to hear how you navigate that.
Yes. So, every patient wants to know, how long is this going to take? And, my first response is, I wish I could tell you, but I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know. The good news is that going to the root cause of these diseases is such powerful medicine that I do expect to see, hopefully improvement from visit to visit. Or again, if we have a flare, we can still, and the photos are helpful. Once we're at future visits beyond the first one, we aren't just looking at their photos that they sent for this visit, we're looking at the progression. And I do like to remind people where they've come from, because it's like, luckily the body forgets, like, oh, I didn't remember that the acne was that bad. I didn't remember that the eczema was that bad. But in a way we want to remember, right? And then if we have a flare, we can say, okay, let's figure out like what caused the flare. Okay, we're still not where we started. So that's helpful. But my process is I see patients every 2.5 months, and I do hope and expect to see improvements from visit to visit. But certainly, patient, comes with 30 years of eczema. This is not going to be a 4-month process to completely eradicate it. I think the good news for patients is that a lot of times, so I'll see them, 4 times over the course of a year. It's like every 2.5 months. So yes, I may be seeing a patient for a year or two, but I'm not seeing them all the time. And a lot of times they're actually clear or almost 100% clear. We're working on just that final little niggle. I made the mistake when I first started practicing where their skin would clear up and I thought, yay, we did it, you're done. Not realizing that, with that proverbial bucket that's filled up, okay, it was overflowing. So we saw the psoriasis before. Now I lowered the bucket enough that it's below the lid, so the psoriasis cleared up, but I've left them teetering at the lid, and then, one little insult and they're back in my office again. So now, I talk about, good, you've been clear. That's great. But we want to clean up all the issues that we saw, all the issues we're dealing with, so that when you come off my schedule, you hopefully don't need to come back on ever. And you've learned how to manage it. You've learned everything that goes into it. And your system is in like a really good place to move forward free of, rosacea, psoriasis, acne, whatever.
Yeah.
So once they start seeing progress, like I said, I mean, I more often patients are crying that they don't want to go at the end. And I'm like, it's time to leave the nest, give them a pep talk. I think we're good now.
That's wonderful.
Really, they want help, they want results.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we've taken us, right up to the end here, but just, thinking about you and your vision, for this field, right? What where do you see this field heading in the next 5 to 10 years, this functional dermatology or dermatology in general? And, where do you hope to see it go? And then I think, speaking to your training program, right, like how that fits into it, I think we can weave that nicely into that conversation.
Yeah. So if your clinicians listening to this are thinking, oh, we don't really hear talks on dermatology that much, it's because shockingly, it is still so shocking to me that within naturopathic medicine, within functional medicine, there really aren't a lot of clinicians who are focused exclusively on dermatology. Of course, it's, as a primary care physician, half the complaints are derm complaints. So there's an enormous number of patients with derm complaints. You're going to see it if you're treating, but the number of doctors or clinicians who focus on it is still very tiny. And we need to change that, both for patients and for practitioners. And the reason I started my Root Cause Dermatology training course to train other functional medicine practitioners how to treat derm the way I did is because I was getting so overwhelmed by patients that I still have to close for usually about half the year. And then I didn't even have anybody to refer them to. I'm only licensed in California, Oregon, and Washington, so I can never see anybody outside of those. And it was like, they were so desperate. People offered to pay me for 2 years up front to fly in for every, it was like, they were just desperate. So I was like, why aren't more people doing this? So really my hope is that more functional medicine practitioners really start to get trained in and focus on dermatology because the need is so vast. There's such a mismatch. Of course, we need clinicians focusing on the gut, on women's health, on, all the primary care stuff, 100%. But we're desperate for clinicians to focus on dermatology and handle all of these complaints that are out there. There are so many more patients than practitioners who really are desperate for and need this help. So yeah, if you're a practitioner and you feel uncertain about derm, or you want to focus on an area where you can charge more because specialists can charge more, you can check out my Root Cause Dermatology course. Sometimes I'm doing live cohorts. Right now there's just a self-paced course. And I go through the 7 most common conditions, teaching you guys how to treat them with case studies. You see the exact, my patients, visit to visit, the exact treatment plans. I pull back the curtain on everything. You see their lab results. You see how I move patients through the plans. I tried to pick a diversity of patients. So not just it was amazing and every visit was better and better and then done, but the real life stuff, okay, it was working and now we've seemed to plateaued. What do you do? Or it didn't go according to plan at the beginning. How do you adjust to that? I really tried to make it useful so that practitioners could hit the ground running and treat this. And, again, create resources for practitioners because there's really nothing out there for functional dermatology other than this course.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not. So that is rootcausedermatology.com. And absolutely, I think that's an excellent place to go. And also, sometimes we see your name pop up in various webinars and other places, but rootcausedermatology.com would be a great place for people to find you, right? And to continue to learn from you. And we do have you offered very generously for our listeners today. If they are interested in taking that course, they can get $250 off the Root Cause Dermatology course with the code RWSlistener. And then we also have for our alumni, we have a special, extra special discount there, $500 off of that course. RWS alum is the code for that. Dr. Greenberg, I could ask you a million more questions and I've already taken up too much of your time, but thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I hope we can have you back again to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty of some specific skin conditions. But the work you're doing is phenomenal, and I appreciate all of the resources that you've put out. I have gobbled them up personally, and thank you so much for being a leader in this area and encouraging others to come along. We really appreciate it.
That's very kind. Thank you so much for having me.